Hello, everyone, and welcome to ODTUG's online education series. Today's presentation will be presented by our friends at Alithia, titled A Whale of a Tale, How Pacific Life Breached the Cloud with DRM to EDM Migration, and will be presented by Kevin Black of Alithia and Stephanie Blair of Pacific Life. Today's webinar will be recorded and available for viewing by members on the ODTUG website. Please place your questions in the questions box at any time during the presentation, and they will be addressed during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. Thank you, Kevin and Stephanie, for being here. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Brittany. Hi, everyone. We're going to jump right in. We have a lot of material to cover, a very basic looking agenda. I'm going to give a functional overview after some introductions, and then Kevin's going to do some technical details and some lessons learned, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So again, my name is Stephanie Blair. I work for Pacific Life Insurance. I'm started out in accounting, was there for over 18 years, also in financial reporting, and then about 11 years ago made the switch into business systems analysis. I was the subject matter expert on our DRM DRG application, so I was very interested and engaged in as our EDM implementation went in. I've had a lot of change in responsibilities over the years, but most recently it's been data management and governance, process improvement, system analysis, controls, and change management, all of which you will find has a place in EDM. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to introduce himself.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm Kevin Black. I am a product director at Alithia, focused on master data management. I've been with Alithia about 9.5 years, but I've been in this space in general, both as a client and a consultant for much longer than that. But in my role at Alithia, I get to work with great clients like Stephanie to help architect and solution their EDM implementation. And then I also maintain close contact with Oracle product management to kind of stay in touch with upcoming enhancements to the product and also to provide feedback to Oracle from our recent implementations. So back to you, Stephanie.
Okay. Just a brief overview of Pacific Life. We're a 150-year-old company, and you can see some stats on the screen. Not on the screen is that we have close to 4,000 employees. We sell mostly life insurance and retirement solutions, annuities products, but also institutional and just coming up, getting into some workforce benefits.
Thanks. Yeah, and as far as Alithia, you've likely have heard of us, but if not, you may have heard of our former names such as Renzel or Edgewater Technology and Edgewater Renzel. That's us. We're now part of the Alithia family. So we are focused not only on EPM now, but we do quite a bit of work on the ERP space and also supply chain and human capital management. We work across many verticals. And also provide a wide range of technology services such as hosting and managed services and hypercare support, as well as several advisory offerings such as chart of accounts redesign and strategic roadmaps. And you can see on the left there, we've been doing this a long time, and we'll keep doing what we do. So back to you.
Well, to set the stage, I want to talk a little bit about what was going on with us before EDM. And still even today, we have PeopleSoft as our ERP. So that's an on-prem solution. We, at Pacific Life, kicked off a finance transformation early this year. And then we have had the other EPM cloud applications already implemented and in production, basically all of them except for tax. And then EDM we implemented the end of March this year. And you can see there a note about record count and nodes, just for an idea if that means something to those of you. If you have a DRM, you might kind of have an idea of how many nodes you have and what that means. Our DRM and DRG application, we did have both. Some people have DRM just standalone, but when we put ours in, we did put DRG as well. And for those of you that may not be familiar, that DRM is data relationship management, and DRG is data relationship governance. So our application, we had put that in. That's an on-prem product. We put it in 2016. It's also an Oracle product. At that time, we had already had some good hierarchies and chart of accounts. Our governance was all through emails and Excel, things like that. So we got all of that built into the DRG tool. We had put together a new chart of accounts back in 2013. So fortunately, we weren't trying to do that at the same time. We already were happy with the hierarchies we had and everything when we implemented DRM. Our workflows, there was some little inconsistencies, I'd say, depending on what dimension you were trying to change. But in general, the users, they knew what to do, and it was working smoothly, no issues. And our user base was very experienced with doing workflow requests and understood hierarchies and how the tool fed to the applications. Interesting point about this is that in 2021, we had moved our on-prem EPM applications into the cloud. So the reason we had all these other EPM applications in the cloud, we'd been gradually moving them with Alithia's help. And by 2021, they were all there except for DRM was the lone outstanding one still sitting on-prem. So the question that posed to you is, why was that? Why did we wait? Well, we had some really good reasons. And the EDM functionality was actually not up to par with what we were used to in DRM and DRG. So our EPM admin had been watching. So he was watching, as you know, Oracle puts out releases often. And so he would watch these releases and see when it was trying to get up to the functionality where it would meet our business requirements, because we didn't want to implement just to implement and then take away functionality. There's also, licensing costs. Obviously, we were going to need an implementation partner, so that's an expense that has to be approved. And then even with the best implementation partner, you need internal resources. And if you've looked into a DRM to EDM transition yourself, it's not a lift and shift like these other EPM products were. So it was definitely a bigger move than some of the other ones we'd had. So we kind of just sat on that, and our EPM admin just kept watching for us. But one day he said, "Stephanie, it's ready." He said, "EDM has got all the functionality that we need. It's ready when we're ready." So we started thinking about the other issues. Well, licensing, we had the type of license where we could have all the users in EPM cloud without having to pay extra for a user, as long as they were within the same cloud application. So like if you had access to FCC, you could have access to any of the others without an additional license fee. And what that allowed us was to have like a kind of sandbox of EDM with just a very basic nodes and users, and we could kind of play with that. We also had DRM and EDM licensings by node. So with DRM, we knew kind of how many nodes we had. So we could probably had a little step up on being able to figure out what the licensing cost would be. We already had been using Alithia as an implementation partner. We knew they had good experience, so that was great. What we find is the availability of internal resources was the only thing that kept holding us back. So we had this finance transformation that's supposed to be coming. So keep in mind, we're back in 2021 right now. And we keep hearing from upper management, it's coming, we're working on the roadmap, we're going to be kicking off soon, but it just kept getting delayed. We had been thinking this is going to be our way to have the resources available. Because if you think about a huge finance transformation, you're going to have a little bit, a lot of budget there where you can bring in some backfill and things like that. So we just kind of thought this EDM move would be part of our finance transformation. But for different reasons, the finance transformation kept getting delayed. Just to show you a little bit about what we were dealing with, this was our name of our team's in Enterprise Financial Solutions. But just to kind of show you what was being supported, you'll see at the time I was manager of financial systems. So I was on the left side of the screen with some BSAs, change manager, business process improvement. On the right side of the screen was my peer, the EPM admin, and he had one senior analyst. And they were supporting all of these different applications for business as usual. And then, of course, enhancements and things that customers requested. And then if you think about it, we had not been through finance transformation. So a lot of these processes were siloed. So for planning, they weren't just supporting a planning app, they were supporting different instances and versions for the different divisions in the company. So how in the world were we going to get, these two experts and a little bit of some expertise also on my team freed up to be able to do this? Well, we kept talking about it and we decided to go for it. We didn't really have an answer. We didn't really answer the question. The EPM admin said, you know what, we'll figure it out. Let's just get started. You know how they say sometimes you just got to get started. And if the finance transformation kicks off, a few months in, then so be it. We'll be ahead of the game. So we got started and we just planned on we're going to do it as we can. So it was kind of like I don't want to say a back burner project because we, put a little bit more time into it than that. I would say if you think about a support group like ours, we sit in the business under the CFO org. Part of your time is set aside for enhancements and projects anyway. Well, we did have a little bit of time for some things that maybe we wouldn't put in because the finance transformation was coming. So you wouldn't put in some enhancements that were going to be replaced later. So we had some percentage of time that we could, some people could allocate to projects, but in general, we're trying to support all the business as usual. And so we just decided we're going to go ahead and kick off this project and let it kind of take as long as it takes. We, I think, initially planned for around 9-10 months. And normally, if you're just have dedicated resources, you're not going to take that long to put in to go from DRM to EDM, but that's how we decided to do it. So your next question is probably, how did it go? Well, you've seen the end of the story, right? Because you saw we implemented in March of this year. So that tells you a little bit, but I will say it was quite interesting. This graph will tell a little bit of the story. So we have first planned to implement early or sometime in Q4 of 2022. And keep in mind, we started this project, we kicked off, I'll say, January 2022. So like usual, we had a UAT in third quarter, had a few bugs, no big deal. But really, we were struggling to get all of our testing done, to get test scripts out there, to teach the users the new tool. I mean, we just really didn't have the time that we would like to do for a very smooth go live. And as we got into the UAT, there was some questions from the users on why we didn't have more training. And it was a very good point because we had kind of taken the approach of, we'll just train them on the tool. They already know DRM, they know the concept and it's the same people. So we'll just train them how to use the tool. But some of them brought up, what about turnover and what about this finance transformation that's coming? We're going to be bringing contractors in and, we'd like to see more training built out at some point anyway. So that was a good call out. And then as the testing went okay for what they had done, that was kind of the workflow piece. But as we got a little bit closer to go live, we were just out of time. We realized we just can't get all the integrations, the last little straggling integrations built in time. So we delayed our go live, pushed it out to around March 31st of at the end of Q1. And then you'll see here this terrible green line at 17 bugs after after go live. And these weren't small bugs. Some of these were big. Like one of them, I think our procurement system was not getting the feed. So we had just, Kevin will go into a little bit, but a lot of it is we just did not have the resources to test like we would like to test. So it sounds like, oh, this project was a big bomb, right? But I'm going to show you a little bit more to the story. First, though, I want to show you how we ended up playing out our resources. So over this 15-month period, as in the end, after the delays, we'll say the project was 15 months long. You can see that myself and a couple people on my team, a change manager and a master data management analyst, we all spent like 2 to 3% now of our time. Now, if you think about over 15 months, it's a little bit deceiving because the change manager and the master data management analyst, so he's like the workflow guy, they didn't really come in until probably 6 months in. So their time was a little bit more concentrated near the end. Myself, I was more just in meetings and consulting, so that's why my percentage is small. But then you'll see big percentages for the EPM manager. You know why? Because he's the one that said go for it. So he felt some responsibility to, take extra time to work on this. And he will tell you himself, he's a high, technical guy, but he said you didn't need to have someone at that level. If he had had another analyst on his team, they could have just as well done a lot of that work too. But they just split the work they could between the two of them to keep the BAU going for all the other applications. And then you'll see in the bottom right corner with Alithia, we had 4 resources from them, around 1,500 hours, and they had no trouble coming in at their predicted, below, I think, their predicted budget. And they were great. If you can imagine how stressful this must be for a consulting firm when we're keep kicking the can and taking time too long to get all of our testing done. Kevin and team were wonderful. Because we would at sometimes we would just be busy with BAU stuff and we'd have to put the project down for 2 or 3 weeks or something before we could pick it back up. So this is kind of what we were dealing with, but the user experience was a roaring success. So that's the surprising part of this whole story. I really couldn't believe that the users could be as happy as they were, but they really were. And how can this be? Well, one of the things that had not really hit me at the beginning when I felt like we were taking this big risk to go for it is, if you think about it, your master data management tool is kind of behind the scenes. Just to think about it from a perspective of people affected, we had a couple of our applications technically anybody in the company could use, so that's thousands of people. But if you look just at our primary applications, you'd see 860 or so users. But those users aren't in EDM, right? They're in PeopleSoft, they're in Essbase, things like that. So when you look at the users in EDM, and then you take out the ones that's just support staff and things like that, it was really only a little over 50 people that even knew what was going on, that we were moving from DRM to EDM, other than ones that maybe had heard of it, but ones that were actually impacted. So just 57 people even impacted at all. And then some of them are backup approvers. So really you kind of get down to even less than that. And for them, it was, all it was, hey, we were going to implement in Q4, we pushed it to Q1. It didn't, really cause any problem for them. The other thing pretty cool about EDM is that there's always workarounds. So this is something that, of course, you don't want to use, but it is kind of comforting. So with those bugs, the 17 bugs, these all come in. Some of them came in and people were putting in, a request for a new account or a project code or something, but they're doing it in advance. So maybe they're doing it, say, 2 weeks before it's ever going to be used. Well, actually, because we kind of had all hands on deck at the time we went live, the team could, between Alithia and the Pacific Life 2 resources, they could fix things, in a day, 2 days, whatever. So for the people that have put the request in, all they maybe noticed is, oh, the SLA was a day longer or something like that. We also had DRM still connected. So worst case scenario, we could do something there and push it. We never had to use that. And then there's always the option too to enter something into, PeopleSoft manually, put in a new account if it was just urgent and we couldn't figure it out. But we never had to do that either. So we never even used, the worst case scenario. I think probably the worst that happened is we were able to tell people, we encountered a defect and need a few days to look into it. Is this urgent? No, it's not urgent. It's okay if it takes a few days, but we still had other things we could have pulled out of our back pocket if we'd needed to. And it was also overcome by the fact that the users loved EDM. They found the interface more intuitive. They love the visual hierarchy that they get to use throughout the request process. There's better visibility to the requests that they've created, ones that are both in process and after they're closed. More flexibility in the downstream applications. So they really felt like, it's a real enhancement to their processes. But then also with this delay, something that was awesome is we had a little bit more time to beef up our training. So our change manager was able to build out some job aids, one main job aid actually, and she embedded some Oracle videos, and she also made some little in-house micro videos using a tool called Articulate is how she built out this whole training. And Articulate's a tool that's meant to build, this type of thing and works with a learning management system. So we use Cornerstone for our learning management system. So this just all worked together, as a purpose-built application for building training materials. And we also were able to beef up something called the tooltips. So tooltips is in EDM, and you can picture when you're on a web page and there's a little place you can hover and see instruction. Well, we were able to beef that up as well as part of our training. So just some little screenshots from some of the user training. You can see we even included things like, what is EDM? Why would I use EDM? Then we had checklists about how to submit a request. We also had accompanying micro videos. And then this on the upper right is a sample screenshot of a tooltip. And so with some of our dimensions, we have, it's not pretty, you can't space it out, but it was still nice that it's within the tool, that we could put some notes here for people to remind them of some of the governance things that we do. So this next screen here, this is one of the micro videos. You're not going to be able to hear the sound, but I am going to kind of just fast forward through it a little bit, and I'll do a little commentating, but you'll kind of see what's going on. In the actual video, if you're in the company, looking at this, you're hearing our change manager talk over the whole thing, and she's going through each one of the steps. But this is actually a page in EDM. That's where this is in our production environment. And you'll see here where she's gone in and she's telling how you can look around the tool, get a feel for the user interface. I'm going to skip a little bit just to show where she gets into actually submitting a request. So she walks through for the users how to submit a request. She goes into the tool tips, things like that. So it's pretty cool. And people really liked this and the whole overall beefed up training in general. And now we're all prepared as new people come in. So that's it from the kind of functional and project overview side. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, and he's going to get into the technical details of the implementation.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Great overview. Yes, so I wanted to take a few minutes and walk through some technical considerations. So these are either challenges we ran into from a technical perspective, or just some gotchas or maybe best practices that will help those who are listening to this webinar in the future. So if you go to the next slide, please. So the first thing I wanted to start with is kind of an overarching design principle, I guess you could call it. So when you talk with Oracle, they'll recognize that there are really two basic implementation patterns with EDM. One is called originating, the other is called more of a master or a front door. And what this means is EDM is architected very differently than DRM. It is not a lift and shift of DRM to the cloud by any stretch. It is a brand new product that uses a very different architecture and philosophy. So with the originating, all this means is that your EDM environment will contain a series of decentralized applications or containers inside one EDM environment. So the trick is to leverage EDM's decentralized nature, but also share common hierarchy maintenance, so you're not forcing your users or data stewards to make the same hierarchy change in more than one place. So one way to do that is with this originating approach, where based on a business scenario or a dimension, you can kind of nominate one of your applications as the originating application in that scenario that other applications will subscribe to. And that originating application may vary based on the scenario or the dimension that you're changing. The other approach is kind of a front door approach, where you have a centralized data governance engine, is the way I like to think of it, that really is your originating entry point for all changes. And then you have a second tier of EDM deployment applications that are subscribing to this front door application. So if you go to the next slide, there's a diagram from Oracle kind of demonstrating that. The point I want to make here is both patterns are perfectly valid, and we've done both at Alithya. They both have their use, so there's not a wrong answer. For Pack Life, we decided to go with the master application approach for a couple of reasons. One is, with them coming from such a strong and mature DRM, DRG implementation, it eased the transition a bit to kind of go into the EDM world, because we still kind of had this centralized data governance application in EDM that kind of resonated with Pack Life, and as they made the transition from DRM and DRG. So it helped with the learning curve. The other thing that is nice about this pattern is that you really are centralizing your approval workflows in your front door or master application. Yet with the second tier of these deployment applications, you're still using best practices where each of those deployment applications are purpose built for a given target. So it's kind of a hybrid approach. It really gives you the best of both worlds. So if you go to the next slide, there's an architecture that kind of shows this in a little more detail. So if you look at this from left to right, so the leftmost box is EDM. So you can see we do have this master application, which we kind of consider our front end data governance engine. There's kind of a second tier of applications, and you can see we have a variety of applications for PCM. PLEXP is for a planning cloud application, FCCS. We have OBIA, OAC, Coupa, and even PeopleSoft. So we have all these deployment applications that are kind of hinged or feeding off of the master application for centralized data governance, but then for changes that are unique, for example, to an alternate hierarchy or to a property that only lives in one of those deployment applications, those changes are effective directly in that deployment tier of EDM. When you look at the integration side, Pack Life already had a nice framework in place using OneCloud for all integrations, so we were able to plug into that. So what we did is we orchestrated all of the exports and extracts out of EDM through OneCloud. For our cloud targets, such as FCCS, planning, and PCMCS, we were able to kind of leverage the built-in functionality with the EDM adapters and push and import those dimension files directly into the target application. For the other applications, including PeopleSoft and some of these other on-premise applications, plus we had a whole series of other legacy applications that we were feeding, such as Vindley and IT ServiceNow and Flexera. For those, we provided those through a staging database. So we actually would produce files out of EDM, leverage one cloud to update staging tables, and then those consuming systems would pull the information out of the staging tables when they were ready to consume it. So, to many of these target systems, they didn't really know the difference, before EDM was providing these this information in the staging tables, and now EDM is doing it. But from their perspective, nothing had really changed. So the integration actually worked out quite nicely. If you go to the next slide, just to give you a sense of the scope of this implementation. So we did have 8 EDM applications, mostly universal adapter applications. A lot of properties, 276 custom properties, not including all of the adapter provided properties. And you can see a lot of node types, hierarchy sets, and node sets. We did a fair number of custom validations and obviously a lot of subscriptions so that we can synchronize the changes between the master application and the deployment applications of EDM. What was interesting with Pacific Life is that despite the large number of applications and properties, we were able to keep the data chain relatively simple. And by that, I mean the number of hierarchy sets and node sets linked to a specific node type. Many cases it was a one-to-one relationship, or maybe in a few cases we had a couple of hierarchy sets, and then we did have some multiple node sets for different alternate hierarchies and things like that. But given the large number of objects, I was pleased with how we were able to still meet the requirements by keeping the data chain relatively clean and straightforward. Go to the next slide. Wanted to spend a moment on PeopleSoft. This was probably the most challenging technically of this project, was the EDM to PeopleSoft integration. So we did use a universal adapter to build our EDM PeopleSoft application. You can see 224 of those 276 custom properties were specific to PeopleSoft. And it took a while to create those. So we ended up kind of dividing and conquering and kind of gave different people a set of properties to build. So that helped, but it did take a while to create the properties. I highly recommend using a consistent naming convention to establish kind of a namespace. So we ended up with a convention of like custom.psft.property name. It just makes life easier when you are on the properties page of EDM. If you want to search for properties, it's nice to have them kind of grouped together. So that helped quite a bit. Another challenge was we had to write a lot of extracts. Since we were using the universal adapter, we couldn't really use the built-in export features because of the unique file output requirements that PeopleSoft has. So we wrote many extracts, both incremental and full. One reason we had to write so many is, one, that there was a lot of dimensions or chart fields. I think there's 13 or so in the EDM PeopleSoft application. But also EDM doesn't have an extract or export book capability yet. So we did have to kind of duplicate extracts for the dimensions inside our PeopleSoft application. And then we leverage one cloud to combine those files into one file. So it ended up working pretty well, but it did mean a bit more time was required to create the extracts initially. If you go to the next slide, we did run into some data issues, and this was interesting. And one of the lessons learned we'll probably talk about before we end here is just to allow more time to really look at the data and do some thorough testing. And what I discovered is there were some data issues that were really being masked or kind of handled behind the scenes by the fact that DRM could directly populate SQL tables, which EDM does not do. So we had issues with, there were property values in DRM that exceeded the length of the field that PeopleSoft required. identifiers, but those were being truncated by the direct DRM to SQL integration. EDM doesn't do that because we're producing files that then get inserted via OneCloud into the SQL table. So we had to do some validations and cleanup on property value links. We also had some issues on blank and null values that were kind of being quietly handled behind the scenes by the DRM integration that we had to account for on the EDM side. So I ran into a few hiccups on there, more than I was expecting, but it was all data related. And let's see, we can go on. So we'll probably talk about EDM and PeopleSoft a bit more on the lessons learned, but the other thing with approval workflows is we were able to leverage the conditional approval policies at a dimension level very effectively. So we did create application level commit and notify policies, but we did dimensional level and conditional approval policies for the original requests because we had such unique requirements. Now, we did not have to go down and create policies at a node type or hierarchy set level, which was good. We kept it at the dimension level, but we did create quite a few policies. But the conditional workflow routing that EDM provides worked perfectly, especially because PackLife was great at identifying a clear set of requesters, approvers, and committers. So we could do a lot of conditional workflow routing just by checking, is the requester a member of this group? If so, route it to this set of approvers. Else, if it's a member of a different group, then route it to a different set of approvers. So having a really clear security group strategy in place and a clear set of requesters and approvers for each scenario really helped define the conditional approval policies, and they actually worked very well. You can go to the next slide. Oh yeah, a quick note is one thing I've kind of learned over a few projects of doing this now is you don't want to ignore the DRG artifacts, but I found that you need to temper how much time you spend analyzing the DRG artifacts with really trying to understand the true requirements. Because again, DRG workflows work very differently than EDM approval policies. And many of the DRG workflows are kind of action code based, like you're doing an add or an insert or a move. Those are inherently built into EDM in the request mechanism. So you don't really have to spend a whole lot of time on that because EDM provides those action-based requests already. So you do want to leverage the artifacts to make sure you understand the overall sequence of approvers, make sure your required properties are identified. But we found it to be even more helpful is really focus on any process documentation that's available and focus on the true requirements and then kind of back into how to make the EDM approval policy meet those requirements. And then the final thing we learned on this is you do want to spend time on design, but it's really difficult to design every possible scenario and combination of approval workflows. So you want to get a basic design in place and then start prototyping it, start building it and showing it, get feedback, revise it, show it again. We found that was the most effective way to really flesh this out, was to do interactive working sessions and demos, get feedback, make changes, and come back and show it again. Let's see, I think we have another slide or two, and then we'll get into our wrap up. So viewpoint queries are a useful feature of EDM. Just to note that a viewpoint query requires an index property to be included for it to work. So one trick we found, if the users wanted to query something that wasn't necessarily indexed, they could reference kind of a proxy index property that we created that was already indexed. They could just include that in their query to really run the query for what they were looking for. So that came in handy for searching for some non-index properties as kind of this proxy index property idea. And then finally, the extracts, extremely powerful, especially on the PeopleSoft side. There were some limitations in terms of, like I mentioned before, no extract book capability, but that is coming. And then at the time of this project, I could not copy the extract profile definitions across dimensions or applications. So I had to rebuild a lot of the same extracts over and over. But there is enhancements coming likely next month, Safe Harbor, to address that. So Oracle, it just goes to show that Oracle's listening, and they're already addressing some of the challenges that I ran into. Okay. Oh, I do have one more slide. So the new EDM feature. So this is a challenging, but I guess a good problem to have is the rate of innovation is so high with EDM, where once a quarter Oracle is delivering a large number of enhancements. So what you have to weigh is when you're in a longer project like this one at Pacific Life is you want to be aware of those new enhancements, but you need to kind of selectively figure out, does it make sense to apply that enhancement now, or is that something maybe we should come back to and look at later? Now, some of the enhancements are more just educational and just, educating the client on how to use it, but other enhancements could require some reconfiguration of what you've already built. So you have to kind of weigh the benefit, the time that you're at, or what phase of the project you're at, and kind of figure out when is the best time to really embrace the constant influx of new features that is coming with EDM. And then to stage or not to stage. So what this means is when you have a longer project like this one was, you need to have a strategy in place for how am I going to keep EDM in sync with DRM during the project so that I can really do more realistic and complete and accurate testing, both in terms of workflows and integrations and everything else. So we consider building kind of an automated process to sync up EDM from DRM. Ultimately, we decided not to. Sometimes I wish we had, but looking at the overall resource constraints we had, I think it was still probably the right decision. But there isn't one right answer to this question. It really depends on many factors of your given project. But what you want to weigh is how much effort is it going to take to build this automated process, realizing that you're eventually going to throw it away when you turn off DRM, but then you are going to get some benefits in keeping the data in sync. So there are pros and cons. You need to kind of weigh those based on your project factors that you're dealing with in terms of time and resources. But at a minimum, at least have a strategy, have a plan in place for a repeatable way, even if it's not fully automated, have a plan in place for a repeatable mechanism that you can use to update EDM from your DRM exports. And I think that is it.
Yeah, so we'll go into some lessons learned. So Kevin, go ahead, and you touched on this already.
I'll continue on this one. Like I said, for me, the EDM and PeopleSoft was the most challenging part of this project for the various reasons I mentioned before. A lot of custom properties, a lot of extracts. We had some data issues that kind of surfaced itself that I was not anticipating. So just make sure you spend a lot of time on really looking at the data, allow plenty of time for testing, and just realize that PeopleSoft is not easy. It's got very unique requirements in how you load the chart field values and how you load the tree nodes and the tree leaves, and it takes a lot of work to kind of replicate that in EDM, since there is no packaged adapter in EDM for PeopleSoft. And then the other one, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Kevin, then I'll add my note at the end.
Yeah, and on the second point, I was just going to say to Stephanie's point earlier, I think we did a good job of testing what was coming out of EDM. I think where we had some issues is on that last mile integration. So, we were producing the extracts out of EDM, we were reconciling to what DRM was producing, but it was that last mile, like making sure that EDM content was actually making it all the way to the target system. I think that's where sometimes we had a disconnect, or maybe didn't follow through quite as much as we thought we had, and we had some hiccups at the end. But anyway, go ahead, Stephanie.
I was just going to mention the scaled rollout actually was our original plan. We had thought, by scaled rollout, what I mean is we were going to put in EDM, but say just for our new one of our new applications. That was our thought. The finance transformation will be coming. Maybe the first one is this accounting hub that we're going to be implementing, and then that we would gradually over time move an application from DRM to EDM. But because our finance transformation kept getting pushed out and we just kept making progress on EDM, we just kind of kept, building out all the applications. And then part of what happened there at the end was we couldn't do the last, we only had like maybe 3 or so left right before go live. And originally that plan had been to scale it, but it was like, why don't we just delay the go live and just, in essence, we kind of turned into a waterfall. We said, we'll delay the go live and we'll just put everything in. And so we did not have the most robust testing we would like on some of those last ones, but we did go ahead and get everything in at one time. But we could have also kept that model of just rolling out one application at a time.
Yeah, and I'll just say a couple words on this. Feel free to add it, Stephanie. Yeah, keep in mind system updates. One thing that we kind of ran into is we were in the middle of the Gen 1 to Gen 2 migration in the final weeks as we were getting ready for go live. So had to do some extra testing and coordination to make that happen. It ended up not being terribly bad, but it was another factor that maybe we could have timed a bit better. But that was something that happened. But thankfully, that is completely done now, so we won't be dealing with that going forward. And then I'll let you talk about the business process, Stephanie.
Yeah, so the business process, like I said, we kind of thought that wouldn't be that needed. These people were familiar with how master data management tools work, but it is a different application. So we had kind of underestimated that. So one of the examples is in our DRG tool, we had some controls in place where if you say were to put a new account on our gap hierarchy, it forced you to also put it on 2 other hierarchies that we require all accounts on for statutory insurance reporting purposes. Well, in EDM, it didn't work that way. And so even though our users were familiar and should just know, oh yeah, I have to put it on all 3 hierarchies, they did have reasonable questions on, well, if I was new, how would I know that? And so we did need to spend some time on that. Since it is a whole different application and it works very differently, I think change management is very important. And I'm kind of using the word change management, assuming everybody understands I'm not talking about SDLC here. I'm talking about the people side of change. So training, communication, understanding the risk and resistance and all of that that goes into the change management discipline was important.
Yep, definitely.
And then flexibility, you heard me talk about that some already, about how EDM's more forgiving than if you were, say, putting in an ERP and you needed to get payments out the door or something like that. There are workarounds available. The governance is a good example. Kevin talked about how it's hard to come up with every single scenario, but that's definitely something that after go live you can continue to make tweaks to your workflow. And we're actually still to this day we're making some tweaks as people are getting used to the new system. They're starting to request how they'd like to have workflow work a little bit differently. For example, our cost center and project codes, we're changing our workflow groups so that it's the people that are in our FP&A area will be the secondary approvers, and all of our other dimensions, it's the counting areas. So we're still making some of those tweaks, and that's perfectly fine to do after go live.
The other thing I think we benefited from is we went live with EDM. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily providing the outbound integration feeds that first day. Like, it could be the next month end close or a couple weeks out. So it did, like Stephanie said, give us some time to kind of flush out any remaining wrinkles in our workflows, kind of focus inside of EDM, making sure our workflows or maybe a tweak to a custom validation is needed, because we still had some buffer before EDM was actually going to be publishing hierarchies to the downstream system. So that actually worked out pretty well.
So some of the things that worked well was really, understanding it's our EPM admin kept saying this, EDM is not DRM in the cloud. It's so easy to describe it to people that way, but he would say it's not the same thing. You need to think of it differently. And so we did do some training even before the project kicked off. A few of us went to an EDM training and really tried to understand the foundational differences there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just second everything you just said, that one of the reasons we enjoyed working with Pacific Life so much was because of this, because they are a very engaged and knowledgeable client. Like Stephanie said, they were keeping tabs on EDM the past few years, EDM being a relatively new cloud product. And so they were kind of watching and seeing how the product matured. And then they realized, okay, it has reached the level of functionality we need to match what DRM does. We're ready to move forward. So, and then it also helped as we were doing design and workflow sessions. The team was so knowledgeable that we could kind of share ideas back and forth and brainstorm on some ways to do things, instead of them just taking whatever we gave them. They could challenge us, and it worked out really well to have such an engaged and knowledgeable customer.
And then that flexibility that's kind of plays into the mix of agile and waterfall methodologies. We were pretty free flowing with being flexible throughout the project, changing our scope to bring in more applications, the finance transformation, getting pushed out, all these things. We just kind of stayed flexible with it. The resource ebb and flow, and Alithia stayed flexible with us, which was great.
Yep.
Already mentioned was some of the change management tools that our change manager uses for projects, which was a risk analysis, and she had an execution plan about how we were going to communicate the change and train. Comprehensive training materials we talked about. I really loved the tool tips and how we used those. So one of the things, if you've done training, prepared training for applications, it seems like as soon as you get it published, it's outdated, right? Oracle comes out with something new, or you change a business process or something like that, and it's like, great, my published job aid is already slightly off. So using the tooltips, which is built into EDM, to me just helped solve that problem in a beautiful way, because what we could do in our job aid is try to keep it kind of high level and point people to, we covered very basics, and then point people to the tooltips. Those tooltips are analyst who manages our workflow, he's got access to go and edit those at any time. So if we decide that we want to put in some kind of new criteria, that any cost center now has to also be added to this additional alternate hierarchy, for example, we don't have to redo our training aids or anything like that. We can, send out one communication just to let people know, and then he can go into the tooltip and add a note, and it's there from now on. So,
Yep.
So really enjoyed that. And then the validations help a lot too, as the users are going through their request and they try to type something in and it's too many characters. EDM has validations that'll stop you and say, you're not conforming to the format that's required.
Yep.
So some key takeaways: just think differently. Don't just keep your DRM mindset. Understand, kind of the differences between the two as best you can. Obviously, allow more time than you would for other on-prem to cloud moves. And just keeping in mind people and processes, as always, sponsorship and buy-in from executives and users is key. Strong change management, and listen to the users, which we did when we did our delay, and we added some more training and such, and so that was helpful too. That's it for our presentation. I don't know if we have any questions from anyone.
It looks like there are no questions at the time, but by all means, for all the attendees, if you guys think of questions after the presentation, you are more than welcome to submit them at odtug@odtug.com. We will make sure to get these questions to Stephanie and Kevin for you. Like I said, there are no questions
The
at this.
slide deck will be posted, right, Brittany?
Yeah, so a recording of the webinar will be available on the ODTUG website for all individual and corporate members.
Great. So there is a few bonus slides at the end. So if you get a chance, go out and look at those. It's kind of related to some more of our change management that we did.
Okay. So thank you to everyone who has attended. Thank you, Kevin and Stephanie, for presenting, and I hope that everyone has an awesome afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.